A corrupt banker thought he was untouchable until Big Shaq stepped in. When a racist CEO laughed at Big Shaq for paying off a veteran's debt, he had no idea he was about to lose everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Shaquille O'Neal had always believed that real power wasn't in money, it was in how you used it. For years, he had made it his mission to give back, whether it was helping kids in struggling communities, paying off student loans, or tipping hardworking employees enough to change their lives. But today was different. Today, he wasn't just helping someone. He was about to expose something much bigger. It started with a simple visit to Summit First Bank, one of the largest financial institutions in the city. Shaq stepped inside, instantly feeling the shift in energy. Cold, corporate, efficient, but completely lifeless. A place where numbers mattered more than people. He adjusted his jacket, towering over everyone as he approached the teller. But before he could reach the counter, something caught his attention. A man stood at the far end of the bank, hunched over the desk of a gray-haired, smug-looking bank manager in an expensive suit. The man was Marcus Hayes, and the desperation in his voice stopped Shaq in his tracks. Marcus Hayes wasn't the kind of man who begged. A former U.S. Marine, he had served 2 deployments overseas, surviving situations most people wouldn't even dare to imagine. But here he was, standing in front of a banker who wouldn't even give him the dignity of a conversation. "Sir, I just need a little more time," Marcus pleaded, gripping the edge of the desk. "I've been making payments. I just had a rough couple of months, but I got a new job lined up. Just give me until the end of the month and I swear I'll—" The bank manager, Harrison Caldwell, leaned back in his chair, smirking. "End of the month?" Caldwell scoffed. "Mr. Hayes, let me explain something to you. This isn't a charity. We don't do favors. You either pay what you owe or we take what's ours." Marcus's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I served this country. I fought for—" Caldwell laughed. A short, cruel sound. "Oh, please," he said, shaking his head. "You fought? For what? Free handouts? You think that earns you a free ride?" Shaq's stomach tightened. Something about Caldwell's tone, his posture. This wasn't just a businessman enforcing bank policy. This was personal. Marcus swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not asking for a free ride." "No," Caldwell said, still smirking. "You're begging for one." The second Shaq heard those words, he moved. The bank was busy, but the second he walked toward Marcus, heads turned. People whispered, eyes widening as they recognized him. Marcus, still unaware of the giant shadow behind him, lowered his head. Caldwell, on the other hand, finally looked up, and the confidence on his face flickered. Shaq crossed his arms, his voice steady. "How much does he owe?" Caldwell blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said," Shaq repeated, his tone sharper. "How much does he owe?" Caldwell's smirk returned, but there was something forced about it now. "Mr. O'Neal," he said smoothly, sitting up straighter. "I'm sure you mean well, but this is a private financial matter. I can't just discuss. I'm paying his debt." The room fell silent. Marcus finally turned, eyes widening in shock when he saw who was standing next to him. Caldwell chuckled, shaking his head. "Shaquille, that's very generous of you. But it's not that simple. He doesn't just owe his mortgage. He has late fees, penalties." Shaq pulled out his phone. "Give me the total." Caldwell hesitated. "Mr. O'Neal, you don't understand." Shaq cut him off. "I understand that you're making excuses. I understand that this man served his country, and instead of helping him, you're sitting here laughing in his face, so tell me the number." Caldwell's jaw tightened, but he leaned over his keyboard and typed in the account details. 78,000, he said, smug again, like the number would scare Shaq off. Shaq didn't even blink. He opened his banking app, tapped a few times, then turned his screen toward Caldwell. A direct transfer for $80,000. "There," Shaq said. "Paid in full. Now go ahead and process it." The mockery that changed everything. Caldwell stared at the phone. For a moment, he was speechless. Then slowly, he leaned back in his chair and laughed. Shaq's expression didn't change, but inside something snapped. Caldwell shook his head, grinning. Wow. I mean, wow. You're really just throwing money away like that? Shaq didn't answer. He just let him talk. Caldwell chuckled again. You rich guys are something else. Always trying to play hero. But tell me something, Shaq. How many more of them you gonna save? Marcus stiffened. Caldwell leaned forward, his voice dropping just enough for only Shaq and Marcus to hear. You think you're making a difference, he whispered. These people? They don't change. You can pay off his debt, but in a year, 2 years, he'll be right back here, broke, begging. That's just how the world works. Shaq didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even breathe. But his heart pounded. This wasn't just about Marcus. This was about every single person Caldwell had crushed under his boot. Caldwell smirked. What? Nothing to say? Shaq slowly exhaled. Then, in a voice so low it sent a chill through the air, he said, You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Caldwell scoffed. And what mistake is that? Shaq tilted his head, his eyes like steel. You let me see who you really are. And with that, he turned to Marcus and clapped a hand on his shoulder. You're good, Shaq said. You got a home. You got a fresh start. Marcus's eyes were still wide, his voice barely working. Shaq, I don't even know how to... Shaq shook his head. You don't gotta say nothing. Just remember this moment. Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. As Shaq turned to leave, Caldwell laughed again. Nice speech, Shaq. But you're not a politician. You're not a businessman. You're just another rich guy with a savior complex. Shaq stopped. Slowly, he looked over his shoulder. Then he smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that meant something was coming. Something big. And Caldwell? He wasn't ready. Shaq had seen men like Harrison Caldwell before. Arrogant, entitled, untouchable. People like him didn't just abuse power. They thrived on it. And after what had just happened, Shaq knew one thing for sure. Marcus wasn't the first victim. The question was, how deep did this go? Shaq had just stepped out of Summit First Bank, still replaying Caldwell's smug words in his head, when he heard a voice behind him. Mr. O'Neill, wait. He turned to see a woman in a crisp gray bank uniform. Lena Brooks, one of the junior employees. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if someone might see her talking to him. Shaq slowed his stride. You all right? Lena hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. What Caldwell did to that man in there? That's not the first time. It's not even the worst. Shaq studied her, his gut tightening. How bad is it? Lena swallowed. I can't talk here. Meet me after my shift. 5 o'clock, coffee shop across the street. Then, just as quickly, she turned and walked away, disappearing through the side entrance before anyone could notice she had spoken to him. Shaq exhaled slowly. He had come in to pay off one man's debt. Now, he was stepping into something much bigger. By the time 5 o'clock hit, Shaq was already sitting at a back table of Main Street Coffee, watching the bank across the street through the window. Lena walked in a few minutes later, scanning the room before hurrying to his table. She looked even more nervous than before. I could lose my job for this, she said as she sat down. Shaq nodded. I get it. You don't have to. No, I do. She leaned in, her voice urgent. Caldwell isn't just rude. He's not just racist. He's a predator. And the worst part? He's protected. Shaq frowned. Protected by who? Lena took a shaky breath. The bank, the investors, even some local officials. He brings in big profits because of what he does. That's why no one stops him. Shaq's grip tightened around his coffee cup. And what exactly does he do? Lena slid a small USB drive across the table. You'll want to talk to Devin Cross. He used to work in the bank's finance department. He can explain better than I can. Shaq picked up the drive, turning it in his fingers. Lena's voice dropped even lower. They call it accelerated asset recovery. But what it really is? Stealing from people who can't fight back. Shaq didn't blink. How many people? He asked. Lena's lips pressed into a thin line. Thousands. It wasn't hard to find Devin Cross. Shaq met him at a small diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asked questions. Devin looked like a man who had spent too many years carrying too many secrets. "You're Shaquille O'Neal," Devin said as he sat across from him. "I was hoping someone like you would come along." Shaq gestured for him to talk. Devin exhaled. "I worked for Summit First for 8 years. I was in charge of loan processing, foreclosure tracking, and asset management. At first, I thought I was just doing my job. But then, I started noticing patterns." Shaq leaned forward. "What kind of patterns?" "Fraudulent foreclosures, hidden fees, adjusted interest rates, all targeted at specific people." Devin's voice turned bitter. "And by specific people, I mean minorities, veterans, and single parents." Shaq's expression darkened. "They're stealing from people who already have the least." "Exactly." Devin nodded. "They jack up interest rates without telling clients, stack penalties that shouldn't exist, and when people fall behind, they pull the plug early, foreclose on the property, take everything, then they resell it at a profit." Shaq clenched his jaw. "And Caldwell runs this?" Devin let out a cold laugh. "Runs it? He designed it. And he's got the bank's full support. He brings in millions this way, and no one asks questions. Because as long as it looks legal on paper, no one cares." Shaq sat back. This wasn't just a racist banker with a bad attitude. This was organized, institutionalized theft. Devin rubbed his hands together, his eyes darting around the diner. "If you want proof, it's all in there." He tapped the USB drive Lena had given him. "Payroll records, client histories, internal emails. I smuggled copies out before I left. Caldwell would kill to keep this hidden." Shaq nodded. "Then let's make sure he doesn't." Before he left, Devin gave Shaq one more name. Maya Lewis, a single mother, former client of Summit First Bank, one of Caldwell's victims. Shaq met her the next morning at a community center. She was young, exhausted, and still recovering from the damage Caldwell had done. She sat across from Shaq, folding her hands tightly together. "You really want to know?" she asked, her voice tired. Shaq nodded. "Tell me everything." Maya took a shaky breath. "I had a mortgage through Summit First. I was never late on a payment, not once. But one day I get a notice saying I owed thousands in late fees. I went to the bank to fight it, but they just kept saying I was in default." Shaq frowned. "Did they show you proof?" She let out a hollow laugh. "Proof? They forged documents, made it look like I missed months of payments. And by the time I got a lawyer, they had already taken my home. Sold it to some investor before I could even fight back." Shaq felt his blood run cold. "And you're saying this happens to a lot of people?" Maya's eyes filled with frustration. "I know at least 6 families in my neighborhood alone who lost their homes the same way. All of them were Black or Hispanic. All of them were making payments, just like me. But the second the bank wanted their house, gone." Shaq rubbed a hand over his face. This was worse than he thought. "Why didn't you go to the police?" he asked. Maya's expression turned bitter. "Because you can't fight a system that's built to break you." Shaq sat back, thinking. She wasn't wrong. Caldwell wasn't just a bad banker. He was a protected one. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. This was about a community being strangled by greed. As Shaq walked back to his car, his mind raced. Caldwell had been doing this for years, destroying lives, robbing families, targeting minorities and veterans with predatory banking tactics. And no one had stopped him. Until now. Shaq looked down at the USB drive in his hand. This wasn't just evidence. This was the key to Caldwell's downfall. But exposing the truth? That wouldn't be easy. Because Caldwell wasn't just a bad banker. He was a man with powerful connections. People who would do anything to protect him. And Shaq? He had just declared war. Shaq knew corruption ran deep, but what he was uncovering now? This wasn't just greed, it was a machine built to destroy people. With the USB drive full of internal records from Devin and testimonies from Lena and Maya, Shaq had proof that Summit First Bank was running a predatory lending scheme, stealing homes and wealth from hardworking people who could least afford it. But a few documents weren't enough. If he wanted to bring down Harrison Caldwell, he needed a pattern, a history, a trail of victims who could prove this wasn't just a mistake. It was a business model. And that's exactly what he set out to find. Whispers of the forgotten Shaq didn't go to the police. He didn't go to the news, not yet. Instead, he went to the people. His first stop? A rundown community center on the south side of the city, where he met with a group of veterans who had lost everything. An older man with a salt and pepper beard sat across from Shaq, his hands folded tightly together. His name was Raymond Carter. "I had a house," Raymond said, his voice rough but steady. "Paid my mortgage on time for 20 years. Then one day I get a letter saying I missed 2 payments. Thought it was a mistake. Went to the bank. You know what they told me?" Shaq already had a feeling. "They told you it was out of their hands." Raymond nodded. "Said my loan had been reassessed. Fees tacked on that I never agreed to. Within months I was drowning in debt I never owed. And when I tried to fight it, they took my home." Another man, James Tucker, leaned forward. "Same thing happened to me. And it wasn't just me. You go to any VA clinic, any shelter, you'll find veterans living on the streets because of that bank." Shaq clenched his jaw. "How long has this been happening?" Raymond exhaled. "Years. Decades, probably." He shook his head. "You're the first person who ever cared enough to ask." Shaq nodded, his mind racing. Veterans weren't just being neglected, they were being targeted. And if Caldwell could do that to men who had served their country, what had he done to those who had even fewer resources? Shaq's next stop was a low-income apartment complex across town. This was where Maya had ended up after losing her home. And she wasn't alone. Through word of mouth, more than a dozen families showed up, their voices carrying years of frustration, fear, and anger. One woman, Tasha Monroe, clutched a folder of papers as she spoke. "They changed my interest rate overnight," she said. "No warning, no paperwork. I was paying 4% one month, then suddenly I'm at 12%. They told me it was legal, that I agreed to it. But I never signed anything." Shaq flipped through the papers she handed him. It was all there. Fraudulent rate hikes, inflated late fees, hidden charges. Another man, Luis Fernandez, nodded. "I lived in my house for 15 years, raised my kids there. But the second my wife lost her job, they took it. Didn't even give us a chance to catch up." The stories kept coming. Mothers, fathers, grandparents. All of them had been caught in the same predatory cycle, their financial stability ripped away by a system designed to keep them in debt forever. And all of it pointed back to Summit First Bank. Specifically, to Harrison Caldwell. A journalist with nothing to lose, Shaq had enough to know this wasn't an accident. This was a financial crime ring disguised as a bank. But exposing something this big, that required someone who knew how to tell the story. That's when he called Carter Mitchell. Carter wasn't just any journalist. He was the guy banks and politicians feared. When he met Shaq at a downtown coffee shop, he didn't even bother with pleasantries. "You got something?" Carter asked, pulling out a notepad. Shaq slid the USB drive across the table. "I've got more than something." Carter plugged it into his laptop, scanning the files in silence. His expression didn't change, but Shaq could tell he was seeing exactly what he needed to. After a few minutes, Carter leaned back. "This is damning. If this gets out, Summit First is finished." Shaq folded his arms. "Then let's get it out." Carter exhaled. "It's not that simple. Caldwell has connections. He's got lobbyists, politicians, corporate partners. If we go after him without covering all angles, he'll bury the story before it even airs." Shaq's jaw tightened. "So what do we do?" Carter smirked. "We find someone on the inside." Enter Eleanor Reese. A former high-ranking executive at Summit First, Eleanor had spent years overseeing financial operations, until she resigned quietly 2 years ago. Shaq and Carter met her in a quiet suburban diner, far away from prying eyes. Eleanor looked nervous, but there was something else there too. Guilt. "You really want to know how deep this goes?" she asked, stirring her coffee. Shaq nodded. "Tell me everything." Eleanor took a slow breath. Summit First doesn't just exploit poor people, she said. They build their entire business around it. She pulled out a thick folder, setting it on the table. These are internal memos, executive emails, transaction records. Every policy Caldwell put in place was designed to do one thing: make it impossible for certain people to escape debt. Shaq opened the folder. The first document hit him like a punch to the chest. It was a corporate strategy memo from 3 years ago. The subject line? Maximizing profits through high-risk borrowers. The key phrase inside? Leverage financial illiteracy to drive long-term revenue. Shaq stared at it. They knew exactly what they were doing. Eleanor nodded. And they didn't care. Carter flipped through the documents, his face unreadable. If this gets out, Summit First won't survive the fallout. Eleanor hesitated, then looked at Shaq. I need to know. If I do this, will you protect me? Shaq met her gaze. I don't let good people fall. She swallowed, then slid another flash drive across the table. Then you have everything you need. Shaq now had undeniable proof. The USB drive, victim testimonies, corporate emails, and financial records. It all painted a picture of a deliberate systemic effort to trap minorities, veterans, and low-income families in debt. The only problem? Caldwell wasn't stupid. If he got even the slightest hint that someone was coming after him, he would wipe the evidence clean. Carter leaned forward. If we don't move fast, Caldwell's going to start deleting everything. Shaq nodded, his mind already working. They needed to strike before Caldwell saw them coming. Because if they waited too long, Caldwell would erase the truth before the world ever saw it. Harrison Caldwell was the kind of man who never worried. He sat behind his massive oak desk, surrounded by walls of polished wood, expensive art, and the faint scent of cigars that lingered in the air. This was his kingdom, his fortress. No one challenged him here. So when Shaquille O'Neal walked into his office unannounced, Caldwell barely looked up from his computer screen. Mr. O'Neal, he said smoothly, still typing. You must be lost. The NBA offices are a few blocks down. Shaq didn't smile, didn't laugh, didn't sit. Instead, he placed a thick folder on the desk between them. You and I need to talk. Caldwell finally looked up, his smirk practically dripping arrogance. He leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together. All right, he said, humoring him. Let's talk. What's got you so worked up? Shaq tapped the folder. Everything in there. Fraudulent foreclosures, manipulated interest rates, hidden fees. It's not just a few bad loans, Caldwell. You built an entire business out of robbing people. Caldwell picked up the folder lazily, flipping through the pages with exaggerated boredom. After a few moments, he chuckled, tossing it back onto the desk. I have to hand it to you, Shaq. You've really outdone yourself. This is some grade A conspiracy nonsense. Shaq didn't flinch. It's proof. Caldwell laughed. It's paper, random numbers, some emails taken out of context. It means nothing. He shrugged. If you're looking for a scandal, maybe go chase some corrupt politician. But me? I'm just a businessman. Shaq's jaw tightened. You destroy lives for profit. Caldwell rolled his eyes. Oh, please. You think you're the first person to come in here waving some righteous cause around? Every few years, some activist thinks they can take me down. And yet, he spread his hands, grinning. Here I am. Shaq exhaled slowly. He had expected denial, arrogance, even mockery. But what got under his skin was Caldwell's complete lack of fear. The man wasn't worried, not even a little. Caldwell leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. You don't get it, do you? He said. Money isn't just about having it. It's about knowing how to make people need you. He tilted his head, smirking. You think I just run a bank? No, Shaq. I run a system. The mayor, the governor, real estate developers, they all need me. That's why I don't lose. Shaq stayed silent. Let him talk. Let him expose himself. Caldwell smirked, mistaking Shaq's quietness for defeat. I know you, Caldwell continued. You're a guy who likes to help, real generous. And hey, that's cute. Paying off some washed-up veteran's mortgage? Great PR move. His smirk darkened. But here's the thing. You can't save them all. Shaq narrowed his eyes. Meaning? Caldwell pulled up Marcus's account on his computer screen. He turned the monitor toward Shaq, grinning. See, I run the numbers. I control the rates. And since your buddy Marcus still technically owed a small balance, he clicked a few keys. Shaq's stomach dropped as he watched the number on the screen jump. Caldwell leaned back. Just like that, his debt just doubled. Shaq stared at the screen. You can't do that. Caldwell grinned. I just did. Shaq could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. Marcus had done nothing wrong. He had been tricked, exploited, pushed to the edge, and now, this man was playing with his life like it was a game. You're going to ruin him, Shaq said, his voice dangerously low. Caldwell shrugged. Marcus was ruined the moment he walked into my bank. He folded his hands. People like him, like the ones you're fighting for, they don't win, Shaq. Not in the real world, because the real world belongs to people like me. Shaq clenched his fists. This was a war to Caldwell, a sport, a rigged game where only the wealthy could win. And he had just made his next move. Marcus was about to lose everything. Caldwell leaned back, completely relaxed. So what now, big guy? You gonna run to the media, cry about how unfair life is? Shaq didn't answer. He was already thinking, calculating. He had two choices. Go public immediately. Call Carter Mitchell, leak everything. Let the world see who Caldwell really was. But if he did that now, before he had locked down the case, Caldwell would just bury the evidence and call it a smear campaign. Dig deeper. Build an airtight, undeniable case. But that meant risking Marcus losing everything in the process. Neither option was perfect, but only one would end Caldwell for good. Shaq took a slow breath. Then, he smiled. It was small, almost invisible. But Caldwell noticed. His smirk faltered slightly. Shaq placed his hands on the desk, leaning forward until he towered over him. You think you own everything, Shaq said, his voice calm, controlled. But here's the thing, Caldwell. He lowered his voice. You just made this personal. Caldwell raised an eyebrow. Oh? Shaq nodded. You want to play games? Fine, let's play. Then without another word, he turned and walked out. Caldwell laughed behind him, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes now. Doubt. Shaq had seen that look before. The look of a man who wasn't used to being challenged. The look of a man who didn't realize he had just lost control. As Shaq stepped out of the bank, he dialed Carter Mitchell. We can't go public yet, Shaq said. Not until we have enough to end him completely. Carter hesitated. Then what's the next move? Shaq glanced back at the bank doors. We go deeper, he said. We get everything. We find the one piece of evidence he can't erase. Carter exhaled. That could take time. Shaq's grip on the phone tightened. We don't have time, he said. Caldwell just put Marcus's house on the line. Carter cursed under his breath. Then we move fast. Shaq nodded. Because when we hit him, he glanced back at the bank one last time. We don't miss. Shaq had played in high-stakes games before. He'd felt the pressure of a Game 7 in the NBA Finals with thousands watching, knowing a single mistake could cost him everything. But this was different. The stakes weren't just a championship. They were people's lives. If they went after Caldwell and failed, he'd bury the evidence, cover his tracks, and crush anyone who tried to stop him. Shaq couldn't let that happen. He needed a plan, a perfect one. And for that, he needed a team. Shaq met Carter Mitchell late that night at a quiet diner outside the city. Carter had been in the game long enough to know when a story had real teeth. He leaned forward, scanning the documents Shaq had spread out on the table. This is bad, Carter muttered. Really bad. Shaq nodded. So how do we make sure he doesn't slip out of it? Carter exhaled, tapping his fingers against the table. We need more than paper trails. Financial records are good, but Caldwell can spin them, blame his employees, or claim it was a system error. What we need is something undeniable. Shaq raised an eyebrow. Like what? Carter's lips curled into a knowing smirk. His own words. To get what they needed, they had to dig deeper, into places Caldwell thought were hidden. That's where Matt Donovan came in. A cybersecurity specialist with a past in digital forensics, Matt had exposed corrupt politicians, corporate fraud, and black market deals before. His skill? Finding things people thought were erased. Shaq and Carter met him at a tiny, cluttered tech lab where Matt was already scanning through Summit First Bank's deleted server files. "You weren't kidding," Matt muttered, adjusting his glasses. His fingers flew across the keyboard as lines of code scrolled on the screen. "This bank doesn't just steal. They have a whole playbook on how to get away with it." Shaq leaned in. "You got anything we can use?" Matt smirked. "Better than that. I got proof." He pulled up a folder of recovered emails, all marked with Caldwell's name. Shaq scanned through them. What he saw made his stomach turn. Cold, calculated theft. One email sent from Caldwell to his executives outlined how they could legally adjust interest rates for high-risk clients, meaning minorities and veterans. Another email: default early, repossess fast, they'll never recover. And then, the worst one. A private message from Caldwell to his board of directors. "If they're too stupid to read the fine print, that's not my problem." Shaq clenched his fists. This was it. This was what they needed. But Carter shook his head. "This is big, but it's still just emails. We need to get him saying it. On record." Shaq's eyes narrowed. "Then we make him talk." They needed a hidden microphone. A place where Caldwell would feel untouchable enough to run his mouth. That's when Shaq got an idea. Caldwell loved expensive restaurants, fine wine, and bragging about how powerful he was. So Shaq decided to give him an audience. Caldwell would never open up to Shaq again, but he would if he thought he was speaking to someone on his level. So Shaq made a call to Eleanor Reese. The former Summit First Bank executive had spent years working beside Caldwell, and she knew exactly how to bait him. She set up a meeting at the Palisade, an upscale restaurant Caldwell frequented, posing as a high-profile investor interested in acquiring Summit First Bank's mortgage division. Caldwell, blinded by greed, took the bait. He showed up in his finest suit, grinning as he shook hands with Eleanor and the potential investors, who were really Carter and Matt, wired with hidden microphones. Shaq sat at the bar, watching from a distance. Now all they had to do was wait. The moment of truth. Caldwell took a sip of his wine, smirking. "So Eleanor tells me you're looking for..." "What? A strong, high-return investment?" Carter played the role perfectly, nodding. "We've been following Summit First's success with asset recovery. Your foreclosure numbers are impressive." Caldwell chuckled, setting his glass down. "It's simple," he said. "You just have to know how to control the right people." Matt leaned in. "Expand on that." Caldwell grinned. "People like to think they own their homes. They don't. We do. They sign a contract. That contract is ours to interpret. If they make a mistake, we make sure it costs them everything." Shaq clenched his fists, but forced himself to stay still. Caldwell laughed. "You think these people read their loan agreements? You think they understand finance? Please. They sign what we put in front of them, and by the time they realize what happened, we've already taken what we need." Eleanor played along, nodding. "And what about veterans? You seem to have quite a few in your portfolio." Caldwell smirked. "Veterans are easy. They come back from deployment with no financial literacy. They get sucked into predatory loans, and when they default, we cash in. It's foolproof." The mics caught everything, every word. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Caldwell openly bragging about his legalized theft. Then, Carter dropped the hammer. He slid a business card across the table. "You know, Caldwell," he said, "you should really be more careful who you talk to." Caldwell raised an eyebrow and picked up the card. The second he read the name, Carter Mitchell, investigative journalist, his face dropped. Silence. Then, "You son of a..." Carter smirked. "Oh, and by the way, everything you just said, it's recorded." Caldwell shot up from his chair. "This is entrapment. You can't..." Carter stood buttoning his jacket. "It's not entrapment if you willingly admitted to fraud, discrimination, and exploiting veterans." Caldwell's face turned red with rage. His hands clenched at his sides, but he knew. He had been played. Shaq finally stood from the bar, walking over with a slow, deliberate stride. Caldwell looked up, his breath uneven. "You," he hissed. Shaq smirked. "Told you we'd play, and you lost." Caldwell grabbed his phone, shaking. "I can fix this," he muttered, already typing furiously. Shaq's smile faded. "You're deleting files." Caldwell froze. Shaq stepped closer, towering over him. "You're about to wipe every record, aren't you?" His voice was low, dangerous. Caldwell forced a smirk. "Even if I was, what could you do about it?" Shaq chuckled. "That's the thing, Caldwell." He leaned in. "We already backed up everything." Caldwell's face drained of color. For the first time, he looked scared. Shaq turned to Carter. "How long before we go public?" Carter smirked. "Tomorrow morning." Shaq nodded, then looked back at Caldwell. "You thought you were untouchable," he said. Caldwell swallowed. Shaq's expression hardened. "You're about to find out how wrong you were." Harrison Caldwell woke up to chaos. His phone was vibrating nonstop, his email inbox flooded with urgent messages from lawyers, investors, and board members. He rubbed his eyes, still groggy, and glanced at the clock. 6:12 a.m. Frowning, he reached for his phone and scanned the notifications. Then his blood ran cold. Breaking news: Summit First Bank, accused of widespread fraud. Veterans, minorities targeted in predatory lending scheme investigation. Exposes financial corruption. CEO Harrison Caldwell at the center of scandal. DOJ confirms federal inquiry into mortgage fraud. Discrimination allegations. Caldwell sat up so fast he nearly fell out of bed. He clicked on the first link, his heart pounding. The screen loaded a front-page exposé from Carter Mitchell, complete with emails, documents, and audio recordings of Caldwell's own voice, bragging about how he manipulated loans to exploit vulnerable borrowers. By the time he reached the second paragraph, his phone rang. It was his attorney, Michael Lawson. Caldwell answered immediately. "Tell me you can fix this." Michael exhaled sharply. "It's bad, Harrison. Really bad." Caldwell swung his legs out of bed. "Define bad." "You're all over national news. The DOJ just announced a full-scale investigation into Summit First Bank. Your board is holding an emergency meeting in an hour. And, oh." Michael paused, his voice turning razor-sharp. "Your investors are pulling out." Caldwell's grip tightened on the phone. No, they wouldn't do that." Michael sighed. "They already are." By the time Caldwell arrived at Summit First Bank's headquarters, the internet was already on fire. Banking scam and where Summit First fraud were trending on Twitter, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences of being cheated, scammed, or foreclosed on by the bank. One viral tweet had over 1 million likes. At Real Mia T. "My grandmother lost her home because of these criminals. They told her she missed payments when she never did. Now they want to act like it was just business? No. Burn it all down." Summit First fraud. More and more people came forward. Screenshots of bank statements, forged signatures, emails from loan officers encouraging aggressive repossession tactics. Caldwell skimmed through the posts, his heart hammering. His name was everywhere. Inside the boardroom, a dozen men in expensive suits sat around a long glass table, all of them looking at Caldwell like he was radioactive. A senior board member, Charles Bennett, leaned forward. "Tell us this isn't as bad as it looks, Harrison." Caldwell forced a smile, trying to mask his panic. "Gentlemen, this is a media stunt, a hit job, a smear campaign. Shaquille O'Neal and his people are trying to destroy our reputation, but we—" Charles slammed his hand on the table. "Spare us the speech. We've all heard the recordings. Do you understand what you've done?" Caldwell stiffened. "I built this bank into what it is. We made millions because I knew how to run the system. And now you're panicking over a few headlines?" Another board member, Richard Monroe, folded his arms. "We're not panicking over headlines, Caldwell. We're panicking because our biggest investors are gone." Caldwell scoffed. "Who?" Charles handed him a printed email. Caldwell's eyes scanned the page. Wellington Capital, pulling $300 million investment immediately. Hudson Private Equity, cutting all ties. issuing a public statement condemning Summit First, Kensington Financial. We do not engage in business with unethical institutions. Caldwell swallowed hard. This wasn't just bad press. This was financial collapse. As the meeting spiraled into yelling and blame shifting, Caldwell's assistant, Lauren, rushed into the room, pale-faced. "Sir." She hesitated, her voice shaking. Caldwell turned, already furious. "What now?" She held up her phone. "The Department of Justice is freezing Summit First's assets." Silence. Then, "What?" Caldwell snatched the phone and read the news update himself. DOJ launches federal inquiry. Summit First Bank assets, frozen amid investigation into fraud and discrimination. His head spun. He knew a lawsuit was coming. He knew there would be hearings. But freezing assets? That meant no withdrawals, no transactions, no financial movement. It meant Summit First was dead in the water. "This is temporary," Caldwell said quickly, his voice rising. "Our legal team can fight this." Richard Monroe shook his head. "No, Harrison, we're finished." Caldwell wasn't a man who accepted defeat. For years he had bought, threatened, or manipulated his way out of trouble. So as his bank crumbled around him, his mind was already working on a way out. He needed to move money offshore. He needed to disappear until this blew over, and he needed to do it fast. That evening, in his private office, Caldwell placed a call. A low voice answered. "Is it time?" Caldwell exhaled sharply. "Yes, move everything to the Geneva accounts." Quietly. A pause. Then, "That's going to be difficult." Caldwell's patience snapped. "Why?" "Because someone already locked them down." Caldwell's breath caught. "What?" The voice hesitated. "Someone tipped off Swiss authorities. The accounts are frozen. The funds are stuck." Caldwell's hand clenched around the phone. "Who did this?" he growled. A beat of silence, then a single name. Shaquille O'Neal. Caldwell felt his pulse skyrocket. He had underestimated Shaq. He thought the man was just a rich athlete trying to play hero. But Shaq had done what no one else had. He beat Caldwell at his own game. His escape plan was gone. His money was trapped. And now? Now he was out of options. For the first time in his life, Harrison Caldwell felt fear. The world watches as he falls. The next morning, a crowd gathered outside Summit First Bank's headquarters. News cameras flashed. Protesters held signs. "Give us back our homes." "No more corrupt banks." "Justice for veterans." Inside, Caldwell's office was emptied out. The board had voted him out as CEO. The DOJ was building their case. And at the heart of it all? Shaquille O'Neal, standing with Carter Mitchell and a group of former Summit First victims. When a reporter asked Shaq what he had to say to Caldwell, he smiled. "I told him the game was over. He just didn't believe me." And with that, Shaq turned away, walking toward the future. While behind him, Harrison Caldwell's empire burned to the ground. Harrison Caldwell had spent decades ensuring that power always worked in his favor. When problems arose, he bought his way out. When people threatened his empire, he silenced them. And now, with his bank collapsing, his assets frozen, and his name in headlines for all the wrong reasons, he did what he had always done. He tried to make it all disappear. But this time, he was fighting a battle he couldn't win. Inside a dimly lit private office, far from the media storm, Caldwell sat with his most trusted attorney, David Lancaster. Lancaster adjusted his tie, scanning a list of judges, politicians, and law enforcement officers with potential influence over the case. Caldwell tapped his fingers against the desk. "Who can we buy?" Lancaster exhaled sharply. "Not many. The DOJ is all over this. The feds are watching every move you make." Caldwell's jaw clenched. "There has to be someone. A judge, a senator, anyone." Lancaster hesitated. Then, cautiously, he slid a sealed envelope across the table. "This is our best bet," he said quietly. "Judge Daniel Forsyth. He's handled financial cases before. He's flexible." Caldwell opened the envelope, skimming the private records of Forsyth's questionable rulings. A slow, calculating smirk formed on his lips. "Set up a meeting." While Caldwell was working on his escape plan, His allies were working on something more dangerous. The first call came to Lena Brooks. She was walking to her car after leaving her shift at the bank, her mind racing with everything that had happened. Just as she unlocked her door, her phone rang. Blocked number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A deep, distorted voice spoke. "Keep your mouth shut, Lena, or you'll regret it." Her stomach dropped. She turned, scanning the parking lot, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. "Who is this?" she demanded. The call ended. The same night, Eleanor Reese found a threatening note taped to her front door. It read, "Retract your statements. You don't want to see what happens if you don't." A chill ran down her spine. She wasn't naive. She had worked for corrupt bankers long enough to know what they were capable of. But she had hoped Caldwell was too busy trying to save himself to come after her. She was wrong. And then there was Maya, the single mother who had lost her home to Caldwell's bank. The woman who had stood beside Shaq, telling the world what had been done to her. She had just put her daughter to bed when she heard a car engine idling outside. Peeking through the blinds, she saw a black SUV parked across the street. It sat there for an hour, watching, waiting. She called the police. By the time officers arrived, the car was gone. But the message was clear. Someone wanted her to be afraid. When Shaq heard about the threats, he didn't hesitate. The next morning, he called a press conference. Standing in front of a packed crowd of reporters, he didn't just address the media. He addressed Caldwell directly. "Harrison Caldwell and his people think they can scare good people into silence," Shaq said, his deep voice carrying across the crowd. A murmur rippled through the audience. Cameras flashed, phones recorded. "Let me make something very clear. You don't scare us. You don't own us. And you damn sure aren't getting away with this." The crowd erupted into cheers. Shaq continued, stepping aside as Maya, Lena, and Eleanor joined him. "These people right here? They're the reason we're winning. They've risked everything to expose the truth. And instead of fighting back like a man, Caldwell sends cowards to do his dirty work." More cameras flashed. The moment was spreading fast, viral in real time. Then Shaq looked directly into the nearest camera. "Caldwell, I know you're watching this." The crowd went silent. "You can threaten all you want, but it won't work. Because you're not just fighting me anymore. You're fighting all of us." Shaq turned to the crowd. "How many of you have been cheated, stolen from, lied to by banks like Summit First?" Hands shot up. Dozens, then hundreds. "How many of you have lost homes, had your debts manipulated, been told you'd never win?" More hands. The entire crowd was raising their arms. Shaq nodded. "That's what I thought." Then, with the entire world watching, he pointed at the cameras again. "Caldwell, you're finished." The moment blew up instantly. Millions watched online. Headlines flooded the internet. Shaq leads charge against Summit First Bank. O'Neill calls out Caldwell in powerful speech. Community rallies behind Shaq. Bank fraud case explodes. Across the city, protests broke out. Hundreds gathered outside Summit First Bank, holding signs demanding Caldwell's arrest. Banks across the country saw angry customers withdrawing their money, closing accounts, calling for justice. It was bigger than Shaq now. It was a movement. Inside his penthouse, Caldwell watched the news with a blank stare. He had never seen a scandal spiral this fast. His phone buzzed. It was his lawyer. "Caldwell," Lancaster said, his voice sharp. "You need to leave, now." Caldwell's chest tightened. "What?" "The FBI is coming for you. Warrants are being issued as we speak. If you're still here by morning, you're in handcuffs." Caldwell shot to his feet. "Damn it. There's a jet ready for you. Get to the airstrip before it's too late." Caldwell grabbed his passport, his phone, his last remaining cash. This wasn't about saving his bank anymore. It was about saving himself. As Shaq finished an interview late that night, his phone buzzed. A message from Carter Mitchell. "Caldwell's running." Shaq's eyes narrowed. He knew Caldwell wouldn't go down quietly. But what Caldwell didn't know? Shaq had already prepared for this. He picked up his phone and made a call. "It's time. Let's end this." Somewhere across town, a team of federal agents got the order to move. Caldwell thought he was escaping, but in reality, he was running straight into a trap. Harrison Caldwell had always believed power meant control. For years, he controlled the system, the money, the politicians, the judges. But now, he was the one running. And for the first time in his life, he had nowhere left to hide. Caldwell's driver sped down a darkened highway, the city lights fading in the distance. In the back seat, Caldwell clutched his passport, a duffel bag of cash, and a burner phone. He had minutes, maybe an hour, before the FBI issued an official warrant. His contact in Switzerland had promised him safe passage. A private jet was already waiting at a secluded airstrip. All he had to do was get there before it was too late. His phone buzzed. A text from his lawyer. "Feds are moving. If you're not gone in 30 minutes, it's over." Caldwell wiped the sweat from his brow. "Drive faster." As Caldwell's car raced toward the private airport across town, Eleanor Reese was making her final move. She sat at a quiet desk, staring at her laptop screen, a folder of classified financial documents open in front of her. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, millions of dollars laundered through dummy corporations. For years, Caldwell had stashed his stolen wealth in hidden accounts overseas, using shell companies and political favors to cover his tracks. And now, Eleanor was about to expose it all. She clicked one final button and sent the documents directly to the Department of Justice, the IRS, and Carter Mitchell. Then, she picked up the phone and called Shaq. It's done. The moment the documents hit the DOJ servers, alarms went off. FBI agents, already watching Caldwell's known properties, got the green light. Suspect is in transit, heading to Hillcrest Airfield. Move in now. We can't let him leave the country. Sirens lit up the night. Squad cars, unmarked vehicles, and federal agents spread out across the city, closing in on every possible escape route. At the airport, Caldwell's jet was already fueling up. His driver pulled onto the tarmac, skidding to a stop. Caldwell jumped out, breathless. The pilot waved him over. "We need another 5 minutes," the pilot called. Caldwell cursed. He didn't have 5 minutes. Then, the distant roar of engines. Caldwell turned. Headlights, multiple sets, coming fast. A black SUV skidded onto the tarmac, doors flying open. FBI agents fanned out, guns drawn. "Harrison Caldwell, step away from the aircraft, hands where we can see them." Caldwell froze. His mind raced. Could he still make it? 1 second of hesitation, then he bolted. He ran toward the jet, waving at the pilot. "Go! Start the damn plane!" Agents closed in. One more step. He could almost taste freedom. Then, a firm hand grabbed his shoulder, yanked him back, and suddenly, he was on the ground, face first into the cold pavement. The next few seconds were a blur, hands twisting his arms behind his back, the cold bite of steel handcuffs, a voice barking, "Harrison Caldwell, you are under arrest for fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and financial crimes against the American people." Flashing cameras, news crews already waiting at the gates. Caldwell screamed, thrashing as they hauled him up. "You can't do this. This is a mistake. I have rights. But no one was listening. The man who had once laughed at the suffering of others was now just another criminal in handcuffs. By sunrise, the footage was everywhere. TV screens, Twitter, breaking news headlines. Every station replayed it on loop. Former CEO Harrison Caldwell, arrested in late-night FBI sting. Justice served, Summit First Bank scandal, ends in handcuffs. Shaquille O'Neal's investigation brings down corrupt banker. Social media exploded. Justice. For the people. Watching Caldwell cry like a baby as he gets arrested? Best thing ever. Karma. A mile 90. He stole from families, ruined lives, and thought he could escape. Now look at him. Yammer justice at Shaq Diesel. Told y'all the game was over. Caldwell had spent years hiding behind wealth and power, but now the world saw him for what he really was. A coward, a fraud, a man who finally got what he deserved. In a quiet office, Shaq sat with Carter Mitchell, watching the arrest video on the news. The two men sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Carter chuckled. "Never thought I'd see the day." Shaq smirked, shaking his head. "Me neither." Carter glanced over. Feels good, doesn't it? Shaq leaned back, watching the screen as Caldwell was shoved into a police car. Then he nodded. Yeah, it does. Because justice wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure this never happened again. And for the first time in a long time, the people had won. The fall of Harrison Caldwell sent shockwaves through the financial world. For years, he had operated unchecked, using power and money to silence his victims. But now, he was behind bars. His empire was in ruins. And for the first time in a long time, the people he had wronged had hope again. With Caldwell gone, Summit First Bank was on the verge of collapse. Executives resigned. Investors pulled their funds. Customers lined up outside, demanding their money be returned. The government had two choices: shut it down or rebuild it. They chose the latter. Under federal oversight, Summit First Bank underwent a full-scale overhaul. A new CEO, Allison Price, was appointed, a woman with a history of consumer advocacy and zero tolerance for corruption. Policies were rewritten to eliminate hidden fees, predatory lending, and unfair interest rate hikes. New programs were introduced to support veterans, single parents, and low-income borrowers. For the first time in its history, Summit First Bank was working for the people, not against them. But Shaq wasn't done yet. To him, this wasn't just about fixing a broken system. It was about making sure the people who had suffered got justice. So he made a call, a big one. Within a week, a compensation fund was created, financed through the seized assets of Caldwell and his corrupt executives. Every victim who had lost their home, been overcharged, or had their finances manipulated, they were paid back, in full. Marcus Hayes, the veteran who had nearly lost everything, was the first to receive his check. The day he walked into the bank, the same place where Caldwell had humiliated him, he wasn't begging this time. He was receiving what was rightfully his. He shook Shaq's hand, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." Shaq smiled. "You don't have to, just pay it forward." Marcus nodded. "I will." But it wasn't just about compensation. This was about stopping banks like Summit First from ever doing this again. That's when Lena, Devin, and Maya stepped up. They launched a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating low-income families about banking, credit, and financial literacy. Their mission? To make sure no one else got trapped in the cycle Caldwell had created. They started with free workshops, legal aid, and a helpline for anyone who needed help fighting unfair financial practices. And it took off fast. Within months, their organization was featured on major news outlets, gaining nationwide support. The very people Caldwell had tried to silence, they were now the loudest voices in the room. A few weeks later, Shaq found himself standing outside Summit First Bank. The building was still the same, but the people inside, they were different. For the first time, this wasn't a place that preyed on the weak. It was a place that served the people. Shaq took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the battle finally lift. Carter Mitchell walked up beside him. "So, how does it feel? Knowing you took down one of the biggest crooks in the country?" Shaq smirked. "Feels like we did what needed to be done." Carter chuckled. "So, what's next? You gonna take down Wall Street now?" Shaq laughed. "Nah, I think I'll let you handle that one." Carter grinned. "Fair enough." Shaq took one last look at the bank, then turned to leave. Because this fight? It was never about the money. It was about justice. And as he walked away, one thought ran through his mind. Wealth isn't about how much you keep. It's about how many lives you change. And today, they had changed thousands. This brings the story to a powerful close. Justice is served, change is made, and the people win. Shaq didn't just take down Caldwell. He started a movement. And that is real victory. They count on you staying silent. That's how they win. But power isn't in money. It's in what you do when the system is rigged. Injustice doesn't stop itself. Someone has to fight back. So ask yourself, when the moment comes, will you watch or will you move?